I'm Rob Sterling. I'm Stephen's son-in-law. And I wanted to thank everybody for being here to celebrate and to share stories and mingle and remember a little bit. So I am going to just briefly share a few words as we celebrate this afternoon. I don't remember when I first met Dad. My earliest clear memory is from about 35 years ago. When Charlie and I were seniors in college, Dad had always been very welcoming with me and the family. Charlie and I had been dating at the time for about 3 years, and Dad and Joanne invited me to join the family on a vacation with Bubby and Aunt Marcia and Uncle Gary and Robin. I had Rhonda and Robin and Lara. A bit of an overwhelming experience, to say the least, to meet so many of the family for the first time in a week-long trip to Mexico. When we arrived at the hotel, Dad pulled me and Charlie aside, looked at us, hotel key in hand, and said, "Do you want privacy?" A very awkward moment in my life, to say the least. I never had a chance to ask him, but I hope that it was as awkward for him as it was. But it was very telling. It was welcoming, was gracious, discreet, when he wanted to be. This was also my introduction to Dad as an adventurer. This was an underpinning of his outlook in life. On her visits, he would tell Julia, "Let's go on an adventure," before taking her to the store or the nature center or the zoo or wherever it was. There was always something to learn and something of the unknown to be explored, even in the simple things. And he brought the same perspective to Lara when she was in college, strongly encouraging her to spend a semester abroad in spite of her apprehensions. The adventure was always waiting. This intrepidness was also exemplified in his love of travel. I'm sure everybody here knows how much he loved to travel with Joanne. Whether that was on family trips with Charlie and Lara when they were young, or later on our trips to France and Scotland and the Dominican and Israel with the boys, his passion for travel and art and nature were clear to us and to the family. His enthusiasm was often shared through the lens of one of his many cameras dangling around his neck, and sometimes overflowing onto the necks of the rest of the family. His passion for photography spread to us all. We and Joanne got our boys their first real cameras. And as teenagers, each of them traveled with Dad and Joanne to see sites and take pictures. During these trips, the boys got to see Dad's ease in engaging with people. Dad used his picture taking to draw people out beyond just getting them to smile, as everybody can see on a lot of the pictures that have been playing behind me. And this is what I think of in celebrating Dad's life. He was a skilled conversationalist, genuinely interested in people's stories, and able to put people at ease with a big smile, a gentle manner, a camera in hand, a camera around his neck, one on his belt, two in his backpack, and a real spirited adventure. So those are just some of my thoughts as we celebrate today. And so with that, I'm going to ask our second speaker to come up, Jeff Packer, who's a physician, fellow Pennsylvanian, and friend of Steve and Joanne's from their very early years here.
Thank you, Rob. Joanne, thank you for the honor of speaking here today. Good afternoon. It's hard to find just the right words to portray a man's life, especially a man like Steve Leimberg, because there's so much that can be said. But I've spent a number of late nights crying, as my wife Jane can attest to. It's no secret to anyone here that Steve had wide-ranging interests and was an active member of many communities, philanthropic, professional, artistic. You'll be hearing from other speakers from some of those realms. I'd like to share my thoughts about Steve as a member of the Jewish community here at Amelia and the greater Jewish community at large. As many of you know, we do not have a synagogue here on Amelia or in Yulee, but we do have a close-knit group of Jewish members gathered on major holidays and in private homes to celebrate Shabbat. And although we don't have an ordained rabbi, we have been served for years by Ron and Debbie Bryce as our dedicated lay leader and chief organizer, respectively. Steve, whose Hebrew name is Shlomo ben Yitzhak Halevi, was an active and beloved member, and his passing has left a deep void in our community. Not having known Steve as a young man, I can't speak to his religious practices in his early years. My views come from having had the pleasure and privilege of being his friend for nearly 15 years, ever since Jane and I became full-time residents here. Steve was clearly very knowledgeable of Jewish history, traditions, philosophy, and culture, and that would include his repertoire of Jewish jokes, which we often shared. And he was always kind enough to laugh at mine, even when you already knew the punchline. Well, it's fair to say that Steve was not a strictly observant Jew in the traditional Orthodox sense. I do believe that he was an observant Jew in the best and most important way. Steve embraced Jewish teachings and Jewish values, and it's clear to me that they formed the framework that guided him in how he lived his life, in his choice of causes to support, and in how he dealt with others. Why do I say this? And what are some of these teachings and values? Let me offer a few examples. In the Torah, Deuteronomy, it is written in Hebrew, Tzedek, tzedek tirdof, which translated means justice, justice you shall pursue. This simple but important phrase reminds us to treat people with kindness and fairness, to stand up against injustice and to work for just solutions, and generally, to do the right thing. Doesn't that sound just like Steve? He was always looking into social issues that impacted the little guy and those less privileged in our community and nationally. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? And if I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? These words, written over 2,000 years ago by the great Talmudic sage Rabbi Hillel, are still relevant today. And I do mean specifically today, because I do believe Steve did, that they shed light on how Steve lives his life. Let's break them down. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? Steve was proud to be Jewish and fiercely vigilant to the evils of anti-Semitism. He was outspoken about what he saw as the forces responsible for the current rise of anti-Semitic incidents, and drew obvious parallels to the plight of Jews in World War II. While occasionally some disagreed with Steve's approach, he was fearless and unwavering in sounding the alarm every chance he had. If I am only for myself, what am I? Steve was a selfless individual. Together with Joanne, he supported a myriad of causes and charities enthusiastically. Take Stock in Children, North Florida Land Trust, the American Beach Community, Rob Amelia, Fernandina Beach Police Officers, Boys and Girls Clubs, Island Theater Groups, Art Association, among others. He gave freely of his time, his work, his funding, and his friendship. I'm hard-pressed to think of anyone else I know who did so much, so willingly for so many. And if not now, when? Steve was not a guy to sit on the sidelines, to play it safe, or wait for the right moment. If he thought something had to be done, he did it. If he thought a message or opinion had to be delivered, he delivered it, whether or not it was one a majority of readers wished to hear. And often they did not. Sometimes this meant running full-page ads in the Jacksonville newspaper, or printing and distributing his own little red book to deliver a political message. Steve's local letters to the editor were legendary, always honest, direct, and factual. Although one could always count on seeing several nasty rebuttals printed a week or two later, usually ad hominem attacks rather than civil discourse, they didn't seem to deter him. On a happier note, it seems, if not now, when, was also the Leimberg philosophy of travel. It led Steve and Joanne to multiple expeditions exploring some of the most picturesque spots on the globe. Fortunately, we can all be the beneficiaries of their adventures visiting unseenImages.com and taking in the many glorious images from their travels. For centuries, the rabbi had been viewed as the central figure of Jewish life, serving as spiritual leader and educator. The word rabbi translates as teacher. Education and teaching, religious and secular, are important Jewish values, and Steve was nothing if not a teacher. As a Villanova University law professor, as a renowned lecturer and author in estate planning, a field in which he literally wrote the book, and he even taught Congress a thing or two when he testified before them in 2009. His lectures on photography were always terrific. At our Jewish community's Sabbath gatherings, Steve frequently led us in Torah study. His commentaries were often original and usually entertaining. That was Steve's way. But he was also serious about trying to glean a message or teaching that had relevance to today's world. He also used our Jewish community newsletter, which Steve and I worked on together along with Fred Borkov, to regularly impart his wisdom and thoughts to members on a variety of topics. No doubt, Steve could have been a terrific rabbi, the ordained variety, if he'd chosen that path. With that beard, he certainly looked the part. Unlike many other religions, Judaism doesn't have very much to say about the concept of an afterlife. Instead, a large body of Jewish scripture and thought focuses on what people can and should do in this world, how they should live in the here and now. This brings to mind another important value in Judaism, one which Steve personified, the concept of tikkun olam, the Hebrew, which translated means to repair the world. It is the concept that Jews bear responsibility not only for their own needs, but also for the welfare of society and the world at large. Some might take this as a call to environmental activism. For others, it might mean striving for social justice or for political reform, or to help adolescents in need of mentoring. Steve, of course, worked to tackle many of these challenges head-on. His involvement with Take Stock in Children or with environmental organizations, such as the North Florida Land Trust and Wild Amelia, among others, is a testament to his embrace of those values. I do truly believe that Steve's worldview and the way he lived his life, which we celebrate today, was in keeping with the best of Jewish values, teachings, and traditions. And while there is much more that could be said about Steve, when all is said and done, I believe my friend is best categorized by a single word. This one's not in Hebrew, but in Yiddish. That word is mensch. It derives from the Yiddish word which means literally human being, but it has a much deeper meaning. In the book Joins of Yiddish, the mensch is defined as an upright, honorable, decent person, someone of consequence, someone to admire and emulate. To be a mensch has nothing to do with success, wealth, or status. The key to being a mensch is nothing less than character, rectitude, dignity, a sense of what is right, responsible. A mensch can be relied upon to act with honor and integrity, and it also suggests someone who is kind and considerate. Rabbi Neil Kershan, author of the book Raising Your Child to be a Mensch, categorizes it as, quote, responsibility fused with compassion, a sense that one's own personal needs and desires are limited by the needs and desires of other people. A mensch acts with self-restraint and humility, always sensitive to the feelings and thoughts of others. To call someone a real mensch conveys a special sense of respect and dignity. In Jewish circles, it is the highest compliment that can be paid, although a true mensch would be too modest to want to be complimented. All of us that knew Steve understood that these words portray who he was as a person. They might well have printed his name in the book as a definition. Pursuing justice, tzedek, healing the world, tikkun olam, charity, tzedakah, kindness and respect for others. He knew some of the key merit principles of Judaism, and they clearly guided Steve as he left his legacy and all of the good work he did in his lifetime. He worked to renew the world. He taught, he provided aid, and he touched many lives. Steve viewed the world not only through Jewish eyes, but also through his camera lens, leaving us his photographic legacy as well. His photos show Steve as a man who valued nature, who looked for and revealed to the rest of us the beauty of the world around us, beauty that too often goes unseen by many of us when we are too busy, distracted, or blind to notice. and we see in Stephen's photos his love of humanity. Each face is portrayed with warmth, dignity, and respect. Whether in his studio or on a local street or halfway around the world, Steve literally went to portray each subject in the best light, regardless of station in life. Judge and janitor, friend and stranger, regardless of age, race, or gender, each image revealing his appreciation for their unique qualities as an individual. Steve had that gift. If only more of us could practice that art and learn to view our world and our fellow travelers within it as he did. For many of us, it's not an easy task. At least it isn't easy for me. But I'll be trying. I do know that I'm a better man for having known Steve Leimberg, my friend, a real Mitch. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. We're now going to hear from Dickie Anderson, a well-known columnist, source of local knowledge, and someone who encouraged Steve in his island photography.
Oh, gosh, my light is going before my very eyes. I'm seeing so many wonderful people that I know love Steve and been part of his journey on Amelia Island. In life, many of us meet and know someone that's truly bigger than life. Steve Leimberg was such a person. His talents, intellect, and compassion touched many through his years on Amelia Island. To me, he was a friend, a mentor, and a collaborator. Our projects together for the Islander magazine were extraordinary adventures for both of us. His professional and artistic talents and accomplishments are unmatched and far too numerous to mention. The Leimbergs first found our island while stopping on a sailing adventure. After several return trips, they decided to make the island their home. Like many of us, they cared a lot about Amelia Island and were quick to get involved and make a difference. Their contributions, as mentioned before, have included so many important things in our community. The Amelia Tree Conservancy, Boys and Girls Club, Take Stock in Children, the Council on Aging, Wild Amelia, the Police Auxiliary, Friends of the Library, and Island Art Galleries and Theaters, to name a few. Steve is highly respected for his beautiful nature photography, as well as his revealing and insightful portrait work. Many of those who've been photographed, I see their faces out here, and I know the portraits that Steve did that were so unique and beautiful. Proudly known as the Birdman of Amelia, his photographs of birds are breathtaking. It has almost seemed that the birds posed for him, showing off their elegant plumage. I sometimes wonder if the many birds that live near the Leimberg house are wondering, where has the Birdman gone? We love working together. One popular feature in the monthly Islander magazines is called Fernandina Faces. We were a team. We married Steve's amazing portraits with my profiles of interesting and impactful people on the island and in our community. Those photographed felt honored and treasured the time with him and their very, very special portrait. One memorable cover story for the Islander featured portraits and profiles of longtime American Beach residents. Steve threw himself into this project, and we savored the amazing time we spent with each of our subjects. The portraits were later featured in an exhibit at the Amelia Island Museum of History. He was a popular lecturer and photographic instructor. He mentored many and encouraged all to pick up a camera or an iPhone and shoot. I remember one memorable photography field trip. We traveled to the Jacksonville Zoo very early in the morning. Leading our group of aspiring photographers in his signature pirate suspenders and his big straw hat, He offered tips on how to best capture the animals in the early morning hours before the zoo opened. His portraits of local personalities and people in the countries he and Joanne visited revealed the very soul of these subjects. Portraits of the aged and those of wide-eyed young children are hypnotizing. A visit to his website, Unseen Images, is an unforgettable experience. Asked why he called his website Unseen Images, he's quick to say, "I wanted to call attention to the incredible beauty and splendor we look at every day, but don't see." Our hearts go out to Joanne and Steve's family. We can each honor Steve and Joanne by doing what he suggested. Take that extra time to see what's all around us, waiting to be appreciated, including each other. I miss him so, and I am proud to have been able to say some words. Thank you.
Thanks, Google. We're next going to hear from Jay Kate, Professor of Marketing, shared appreciation of entrepreneurship and activism, the political process with
Joanne, just like everybody else, thank you for making me part of this. It's a true honor. But in another sense, it was a nightmare. Because like Jeff, I spent many hours, night and day, thinking about what I could tell all of you that you didn't already know. In fact, so many of you knew Steve and Joanne years before Brenda and I even knew there was an Amelia Island. I could tell you Steve was an inventor, having a role in creating an electronic spreadsheet for state financial planners. But his colleagues and users could tell you much more about that experience and how valuable that tool is, and I think one will do that today. I could tell you he was an educator, having taught at several colleges and universities. But that's better left to his students who know how inspirational he could be. I could tell you he was an innovator, being part of the first web-based data and analysis platform for legal accounting. But this too, his peers and clients know much better than I. I could tell you he was a writer, having authored numerous books and newsletters. But I leave that to the multitude of readers who could teach you how much they learned from reading his work. I could tell you he was a gifted orator, which I wish I was, in high demand in both the public and private sectors. But those who attended his talks and lectures can tell better how he inspires them in each performance. I could tell you he's a talented photographer, but someone better than I did. But I do know how he captured the beauty of Amelia Island, the places he and Joanne traveled around the world, and he found the inner light in the human beings he took pictures of. Very rare. I could tell you he was a philanthropist, giving of his time and talent, but I'll leave that to the beneficiaries of the generosity. I could tell you he was an adventurer, traversing the world by land, sea, and air. But the best memories of those belong to Joanne and their traveling companions. I could tell you he was a learned theologian, but that's untaken care of. Or I could tell you he was a beloved husband, brother, father, and grandfather. But Robert, thank you for taking that role. I could tell you all these things, but I won't. Instead, I want to tell you about the one occasion that I had the wonderful opportunity to be in the front row and watch Steve at work. It was the 2020 presidential election. It was the time I saw Steve become that benevolent prankster who grasped an opportunity to be what the late John Lewis called a good troublemaker. And you knew it was coming. You could see it in a dry smile and in the twinkle in his eye. Steve was the one who led the charge. When he saw that something needed to be done, he became John Belushi in Animal House. You know the scene. We're just the guys to do it. Let's do it. Unlike the members of Delta House, however, there was no futile and stupid gestures. Steve's political activism had a noble purpose, and it was driven by wisdom and clarity. I learned something else from Steve during the months we worked together on that campaign. The true test is not whether you lead the charge, but whether others follow it. Good leaders have to be salespeople. Success depends on others buying into your vision and wanting to be part of it. We originally hoped to place one one-page ad in the Bernardino Beach News Leader. Steve had a bigger vision. He said to me, what if we did an ad every week up to the election and really told people what we think and why it's important we are supporting who we support? Steve reached out to his network, many of you who are here today, and within 3 weeks we raised enough money to cover 6 full-page ads in the Fernandina Press, but also 6 full-page ads in the Jacksonville Times-Union. And I didn't put this here, but the work was so good, and Steve was such a part of it, we had people from around the country who heard about it and asked us if we would give them the rights to use that content in their local papers. Hopefully it did more good in their states and it did people. The day I realized how much Steve meant to me was when we were approached by the local Democratic Party to develop a similar campaign for the midterms. His health was already deteriorating. I could tell he was not up to it, and neither was I. My energy and commitment for this kind of work was fueled by our give and take about the content, our celebrating the victories with these publications, and the disappointments when the community didn't like the first draft of our ads, and we worked together to find out how we could be better the next time. So let me close where I began, thanking Joanne and sharing one more memory. The day after we lost Steve, Joanne called me, and she apologized. She said, I know you would have wanted to say goodbye, but my response was, no apology necessary. It was much more important that I had had lunch with Steve a few months earlier. That moment, frozen in time, was the way I wanted to remember Steve. And as I recall the experience, I'm reminded of Ted Kennedy's eulogy for his brother, Robert. Steve need not be idolized or even enlarged in death beyond what he was in life, but be remembered simply as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it, saw need and tried to fill it, and saw beauty in the world and tried to share it. How fortunate we all are to have had someone of such great wisdom in our presence. Boy, I'm not quite done. Steve and I shared everything we wrote with each other in the last years. He was very good at editing mine, and hopefully I was as helpful to him. So when I wrote this, I said, Steve, I want you to take a look at it. And he said, yeah, it's not bad, but it ain't you. It's way too serious. In fact, you can do better. So here it is, folks. And please feel and join in. If Steve had been an inventor and not an educator, Dianu. If he had been an educator and not a writer, and maybe if he had been a writer and not a gifted orator, if he had been a gifted orator and not a talented artist and photographer, if he had been a philanthropist and not an adventurer, if he had been an adventurer and not a learned theologian, if he had been a learned theologian and not a beloved husband, brother, father, and grandfather. But as Garth would say, not. I have no doubt if Steve had been given more time, even all this would not have been enough. There definitely would have been one more thing,
And one more next thing, and one more next thing.
Thank you again for the honor.
And thank you, Jay. I'm going to last introduce Howard Zaritsky, a nationally known estate planning attorney, co-author with Steve, friend, fellow traveler who has known Steve longer than anyone else here with the exception of the spout.
Not quite true, Phil.
Breathes hard enough. I probably need to use the microphone. A lot of you just know Steve because he was the best person you ever met, which he certainly was for me. And because he was an amazing photographer, which is true. But those who didn't know him professionally, he was nothing less than a giant in our field. I first met Steve in 1979 when I attended the NYU Institute on Federal Taxation, and Steve was one of the speakers. The NYU Institute is a gathering of tax geeks that get together to hear incredibly boring, really smart people demonstrate how smart they are and how much they know about very long, tiny topics that you will never see in your office. They do, you won't. I spent a week listening to these talks, and then on Friday, Steve spoke. The first talk in the entire week that I enjoyed. I won't tell you his topic because for most of you it wouldn't be significant. And it was acceptably not a giant topic. But his entire presentation, besides being amusing, which Steve always was focused on here's something that you could do for your clients that will help them, and probably almost all of your clients to one degree or another. And afterwards, I went up to Steve and he told him that I really thought that was a tremendous presentation. And we wrote down with Martha and Steve and I. All right, don't move the mic. Sorry. I'm being reminded not to move the mic. Very difficult for me. We went down in the elevator with him. Steve, like most people who do a lot of lecturing, meets friends at conferences. I can tell you for me, I have a lot of people who were really good friends for 2 hours. And I don't see them afterwards, maybe a phone call, or maybe I get plugged back to the same conference and I see them again. That wasn't Steve's way. He'd walk out of every conference with 2 people who he'd be friends with for the rest of his life.
And that, he's the only person I've ever known who was like that. In a field where we go to a lot of conferences, we speak at a lot of conferences, we write a lot. It's just it was extraordinary. A few years later, I mean, I had kept somewhat in contact with Steve after the program, but a few years later, I got asked about work. My publisher said, "Would you have an interest in doing a book on this particular topic?" And I said, "Yeah, but only if I can get the right co-author, and there's only one on set." And so I contacted Steve, because he had written extensively on it, and he actually knew more about the subject than probably anyone else alive. And we wrote it together. It was the most fun I had writing a book in my entire career, because Steve was one of the few people I've worked with who understood deadlines, and he knew that the point of writing was to make really complex subjects understandable. He would make them understandable to the point that you almost thought was obvious. Why the heck I didn't think of it that way before? And it was remarkable. The book has done very well. It is still doing well. And it is probably the one of which I am the most proud. When Steve died, I was asked by Joanne to sort of spread among the estate planning community word of his passing. And I received a lot of comments from my notices. That didn't surprise me. People talked about how smart Steve was, which he was, and how much he did for the profession, which he did. He did more to help the estate planners do their job competently and correctly than anyone else, I think, in the field. He made people in my field view what we did as something other than diseases of the rich. Though, in fact, that's not entirely inappropriate. Tax laws are complicated and can be stupefying sometimes, but Steve was the best in the business at making them understandable. One colleague of ours told me that he went up to Steve at a conference and asked him a question, and Steve spent a fair amount of time with him, explaining and pointing out some places he could get additional information and such. And then he stopped, and my friend stopped and said, "Can I ask you a question, Professor Leimberg?" He said, "Oh, sure, why not?" He says, "Why are you so nice?" And Steve thought a second, which I suspect was for dramatic effect, and then said, "I just find that life is easier that way." I thought that about summarized Steve as well as any statement I'd ever met and heard. He was a giant in our field. He will be greatly missed, and he was the best man I've ever known.
Thank you very much.
So Steve's photographs have been and will continue to be shown. But before we continue, we thought you might enjoy seeing part of a presentation Steve put together after sailing his 50-foot Amel sailboat back to the U.S. from France. And afterwards, we invite you to stay, enjoy refreshments, and share stories with one another.
I knew I had to have that boat. And as foolhardy as it was, I signed the paper right at the dotted line, just the way every salesman dreams someone would come along and do. Paris is a city for lovers, and I enjoy showing people for the first time what a magnificent woman Paris is. And I enjoyed showing Jesse and you and Joanne my Paris.
You're figuring 40 days? Well, from here to the States, it's at least way to take us for
20 days, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, maybe not so much, but I mean, if we stop in Spain and if we can stop in Zetor, it's at least 26, 28 days of sail.
okay, if you have 15 days worth of rice, 15 days worth of pasta. All right, you said something about 50 pounds of flour. And if there's first.
You know, me, I like to make my bread. To make bread, you need 2 pounds of bread. If you think you make a bread every day, it's make 80 pounds, make a little 25.
Bread every day.
You shaking your head because I watched on the trip to Brazil the fellas making bread,
Bread?
and I don't bake bread. I do windows, but I don't bake.
It's 9:30 a.m. one Saturday morning. We're about to leave. The skies are cloudy. It's been raining all night. The storm's predicted ahead. We're ready to go. So here we go, on our way to the Chesapeake Bay. The sea seemed to be endless beyond description, vast beyond belief.
We saw dolphins staying.
Laying in front of the boat.
Looked like 5 or 6 dolphins. No, way out there, there's must be a vessel. Yeah.
Down.
This was a short man.
Well, it's just about centered on it now.
It's a beautiful port.
See, if you had to bet it, we would have looked.
Loser mixes drinks tomorrow night. Well, Olivier, I'll have to hand it to you.
Yeah?
You did a pretty good job of anchoring to get that centered in that low spot.
We approached the Azores in total darkness. We could only see the shapes of the islands on the radar screen. And then, as the sun rose, there was something coming out of the sea that was green, and it rose straight out, and it was so incredible to see green again. Something other than the sea and the sky. It was green and wondrous.
Teaching to drive a car and setting with your wife is one of the 2 things that you still do for your marriage.
But boy, that was sailing school. They get a lot of couples that come in for basic sailing lessons. They always split the husband and wife. Get them on different boats.
Is it too much together? What is it?
Well, I can't see what difference it would make between that and living together on shore.
If you're on a boat, you're living together for extremely long periods of time. And a
24 hours.
or whatever, 24 hours a day. You can't go out on a store. There's like no release for your tension. And it builds up. Even if you're alone, you have a lot of tension. You have to scream and you take it out on the only person.
So is the moral of this story that you should be lovers in separate boats, but not husband and wife on the same boat, but you can sail side by side for thousands of miles?
No, you should not be on a boat alone with your wife. It doesn't work.
I don't find.
We're not married.
My impressions were light and dark and shafts of pastels, and just wonderful color images. I know more now about what it takes to go to sea and what it takes to be a seaman. I learned an awful lot from Olivier and from Tanya, from you, Dale, and I learned great lessons about compassion and caring and wisdom from all of them, and especially from Jesse. I learned what it takes to live together in tight quarters. But I learned very much that I love the sea, and as much as I fear it, as much as it could be your greatest nightmare, it's also a wonderful world.